All right. You guys are the Hardy crew, and I see the back row filled up really good. Hi, I'm Audrey Katcher, partner Reuben Brown, here to give you some insights on the information security program concepts. But I've got a really cool speaker here with me, Rob Rudloff. He leads our cybersecurity practice, and he's going to take all your really tough questions. I only get the softball questions, okay? But Rob has years of experience with cybersecurity. He was doing cybersecurity before it was named that, with the Air Force, working with the NSA and Pentagon, and at PricewaterhouseCoopers with me, attacking little beer companies and aerospace companies, right, Rob?
That's right.
And he never did tell me what he did in the Air Force. But he is a physics major, and more on your background.
It's good, a good overview. Over 25 years doing this. I'm an information security professional. Just happen to work for a CPA company on the consulting side. But we're going to get into some good cyber definitions today and some stories, hopefully. And if you guys have questions, if anyone has questions, particularly if we accidentally go wonky and start using acronyms and talking tech, please raise your hand and we will fix it. But we'll try to keep this interesting from your perspective and really do plan on asking questions. Any questions you want on cyber and the subjects at hand.
And a little bit of a background on me. I've been doing IT audit for most of my career, 18 years PricewaterhouseCoopers, 8 of those as a partner, and then 15 years at Reuben Brown. But what I've always been focused on is the innovation of the technology and how we're helping govern and manage that risk. So I'm going to bring that into the information system program concepts discussion today.
Okay.
And with our overview, this was in the materials for you. We're talking about cybersecurity risk at warp speed because of the AI. We're talking about the third-party risk. Did you hear of a few third parties that had some failures this year? Maybe because of security, maybe because of change management. So it is changing very fast. And your point of resilience, and when I say you, I'm speaking to those insurers, the licensees, the people that need to be, and the governments, need to make sure that you have a good information security program in place. That information security program is going to be your path to resilience, and that's going to be the success in the future. It's a very interesting day, so get ready to take some notes and some takeaways. Not everything's in the slides for you. So today at 3 o'clock our time, the U.S. Senate subcommittee started their discussion. Actually, it was called Insider's Perspective Meeting today, covering privacy, technology, and law, including some Margaret Mitchell, the former research scientist with Google AI, and the OpenAI former technical staff, William Saunders. So more is happening out there today, each and every day, on the technology, on the artificial intelligence front. These are going to be the areas that we're focused on as far as the data security model audit law. Hopefully you're in some of the states that have adopted. If not, hopefully you can start looking at this and considering how this could apply in your environment. So the focus today was really around Section 4. We will end up having to touch on other sections to get you into Section 4. But it's around the risk assessment, the risk management, Board of Directors oversight, third-party risk, and some incident response plan. Before we just keep going, did anybody come into this session with like a burning question in information security or data security? Don't see any hands. We're going to have to get you another Diet Coke or something. Okay, Rob?
So just some key topics we're going to cover just to set the stage so we're on the same level. So in the guide, in the model law, it covers certain topics like information security program, and what it's referring to as a formal written program. So it's not talking about, but it also includes all the informal processes that go with it. So I don't know how many of you have seen a formal security written program out there, but there's also always seems to be a bunch of unwritten policies, unwritten tasks, the knowledge in the village to get it done. I've heard some interesting terms on that, but just have to take into consideration everything. And the key thing is it's addressing administrative, technical, and physical controls. So that draws right out of HIPAA, if you're all familiar with the Health Insurance Affordability Act, and the high-tech follow-on. Anyway, those three areas are the core areas that they want the information security program to address. So that's important because that's what the model law wants. The other thing about the model law is it refers to non-public information, which seems awkward to say, but really it's just sensitive data. And in our case, oh, whoops, did I not go forward? Sorry. I think I hit the red button. There's two buttons. Who knew?
Technology.
There's also non-public information, which is really just private business information, but could also be personally identifiable information or protected healthcare information. And in the industries you're working with, I'm sure there's a lot of both. The whole point about that is we've had some major breaches, Change Healthcare not amongst the least. And these are important things we need to focus on, and the insurers need to focus on, and the examiners need to make sure the insurers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. So just some key concepts there. And then there's a few terms I just want to cover. These may get a little security wonky, and if they do, please throw something or raise your hand. You'll see in the model law things referred to as an event. In the IT world, there are events. In the security world, there are events, and then there's events with a capital E. And typically, and we'll talk about this later, you get into your incident response plan, an event is evaluated, and it may become a larger event or more important event, and then eventually become a security event. Same thing with incident and incident. Incident's used pretty loosely, both in the model law. It's used consistently in the model law, but it's used pretty loosely across IT and security. An incident can simply be an investigation being conducted. It can also be a major incident that the response teams are now engaged and the incident response team is engaged on. It can also raise to the level of a significant incident in the IT world, which means you probably have an outage and you're engaging your disaster recovery plan. Something like the CrowdStrike outage, which wasn't a security event, but it was an outage event. There's some other terms that are in there. Reasonable likelihood, and so I'll let Audrey opine more on that, but that really just gets down to how likely is this event, so, and then material harm. And as an IT person, right, I think of if it's taking my systems down, it's material harm, but there's really more legal terms around those.
I think it goes into when we talk about the risk assessment, when we're talking about the likelihood as well. Once the event has happened, that gets to be almost a legal situation for the analysis. So we'll talk more about likelihood with risk assessment.
And then the last term on the list I just like to refer to is the B word, because we don't like to say that word. Hopefully none of you like to say that word either. Remember that an event or an incident, even an email compromise, even somebody accessing our network in an unauthorized manner, may or may not be a breach. It is definitely a security incident, security event or security incident, but you need the legal team to get involved to declare it a breach, because once you say the B word out loud, I'm sure across those that do cyber insurance, right? Then we engage the breach coaches, and that's a whole different event than if we just have a security, somebody's email gets compromised. So just things to think about. So just some statistics, because it seems like in the security world we have to throw these out. And again, if any of you are involved in cyber insurance, you probably already know these or know of them. But these are from Sophos, which is one of the major antivirus companies. The point here is just that ransomware is expensive. It's terrifying. I don't know if has anybody in the room, has your organization experienced ransomware? Oh, I see at least one or a couple of hands. And so, there's a big debate amongst law enforcement, security professionals, and no offense, but insurance companies and regulators about whether or not we should pay ransom, because if we pay them, they'll keep doing it. But those that paid ransom, according to Sophos, was about 2.6 million in settlement, or about 1.6 million in recovery from backup. I don't think the recovery from backup includes the personnel time to do the recovery. I think this is cash out of pocket checks that were written, just based on the way it was written up in Sophos' report. And then they mentioned 30% of ransomware includes exfiltration, which is the taking of data. So I don't know, are any of you involved in cyber or know cyber insurance very well? All right, see a couple.
Any input or anything you want to add to that? I saw one hand.
I'll just tell you that 10 years ago, I was a chief information security officer, and we had ransomware, and it would affect one computer and whatever that computer was connected to. In my case, they were professors, typically from the business school because they have PhDs. They're brilliant at what they do, but they like to click on things, which drove me crazy. But we had controls for that, and we couldn't stop them from clicking, but we could recover them quickly. So 10 years ago, it was a few computers and maybe a network drive or an attached drive or something like that. 6 or 7 years ago, it became they would spread, like they would crawl your network and spread the ransomware out. In the last few years, it's turned into this double ransom, like we saw with Change Healthcare, although I think they had a triple ransom, right? They had the ransomware to get their stuff back, their systems back online. The bad guys had exfiltrated their data and demanded a ransom, or else they'd release it. And then their buddies who didn't get paid from the first guys, because who knew thieves would not be honorable to other thieves, also wanted money to not release that data.
I thought on the dark web they were good thieves. They'd market themselves about how.
I also heard that they have like 1-800 helplines now, but those are only for the really organized ones who mainly speak, Russian.
Well, what about the reputation cost? Is that in the numbers?
And I don't think that's the other thing I don't think is in the numbers is reputation cost and some of the downside, down market impacts on these. So these are just numbers to let you know it's a problem. This is why the bad guys do it, because there's money. The next slide. This is really where I question my career choices, being a white hat.
You can't read it. You want to tell them
Oh, yeah, so
how much you could be making?
Investment scams, according to the FBI's 2023 report, investment scams were $4.5 billion. Business email compromise with associated wire fraud was over $2.9 billion. And then the numbers just keep going from there. So, and I'm thinking $2.9 billion for a small island with no extradition, don't you think? Yeah, no, all right, no, it's a thought.
We got a couple responses.
All right, so now we're gonna go into the why.
Click through that.
Yep. So the money part is the money part is why they do it. This part is what they do to get in, and we'll just take a minute to step through. Like, this is the anatomy of an attack. This is how attacks happen, and what they look like. So you've got your network. Do you see those different circles? So they're supposed to represent the different parts of your network. So we all have like part of our network where we work every day, but you might have segmented parts where there's special data, or the insurance companies may. Insurance companies will. There might be HIPAA data, there might be credit card data, it might be isolated in some other way, but they're going to have those isolated data zones. And then the firewall and the cloud solutions are really just there to show those are areas that we now have a lot more of. So these are the attack vectors. These are all the areas the attacks are coming from. So if you just follow the circles around, it's mainly criminals, because this is really about money. For some groups and some organizations, especially those of you who work for the state or states, it could also be nation-state actors trying to infiltrate the governments. But most of these are criminal attacks. Organized criminals, the one a day, every day, we call them script kiddies, who are just messing around to see what works. And then you've got your anonymous and other threat actors doing things as well. Most of the attacks, as I'm sure most of you know, come in through phishing these days. But occasionally, it's a configuration error. State of Colorado, a few years ago, the Colorado Department of Transportation, if any of you have heard of that one, they stood up a server and a practice run in AWS. But they attached it to the domain, but they didn't use the standard configuration items. It was only up for about 20 minutes before it was attacked, taken over, and reversed into. So those type of attacks are happening. Most of the time, though, it's phishing attacks. They're coming after us as humans. Change Healthcare, I think, was rooted to a phishing attack. If any of you heard of the MGM attack, that's the one where they surfed LinkedIn and then used social engineering to confuse the help desk and get them to give up the information. Really good write-up in the Wall Street Journal. I read it. It's just fascinating. Not too technical, but just the right. So what they want to do is they want to get in, get a foothold, and then spread. So this is where I mentioned they don't just get in and launch ransomware on that one computer. They get in and they hide. And what they do is they hang out for a while until they can get privileged credentials. And there's a lot of ways they do that. We can go through any of those if you want, but there's techniques they use to get those credentials until they get elevated to enterprise administrator or some other administrator role. And then what they do is they plan their attack. right? They say, what do we have here? Is this an MGM grant? Oh, they have a ton of money, right? Or is this, Rob's computer at home? That's boring, right? That's not going to get me a lot of cash. Or is this a not-for-profit? Or is it a hospital? They go through that calculation and say, all right, what do we have? What type of attack are we going to run? Can we spread this across the whole thing? What damage can we cause? And then they ask for the money. The really smart thing they're doing in a couple of cases, and I'm not sure if it was limited to just a few criminal groups or was wider spread, but what they were doing is breaking into companies, finding how much insurance they were carrying, and then asking for 10% less. So no matter what the number was, so 5 million in cyber, we want 4.5, hoping for a fast settlement. I thought that was really clever. Again, career choices. Anyway, they're looking for internal spread to see what they can get into. And then for us, and I'm sure for any of you involved in cybersecurity side, is really, does the organization have that recovery capability? Can they tell the criminals to go pound sand, or at least delay them long enough they can recover their systems and hopefully avoid a release of sensitive data?
So just a reminder there, what you're looking for in the information security programs is that they're protecting against situations that Rob's describing. We wanted to get the pictorial story to you on what they're doing, why they're coming in, to give some background before we get into more.
And so the next sequence we're going to look at, we call it understanding the system or the scope. So if you're on the examiner side or audit side or the company side, it doesn't really matter. But you want to understand what is the scope of our environment that we're trying to protect. So where is that sensitive data? It's critical to understand where that data flow is, where the control boundaries are, and service provider requirements. So you saw that previous diagram. That's the attackers coming in. From this side, we're looking at it from how do we protect against those attackers. I think one of the fraud presentations earlier talked about prevention as opposed to recovery or detection post-fraud. So the key thing here is to ask a lot of questions. That may be, can I see your network diagram and can we step through it together, understand where the data flows? Because I don't want to get too wonky technical, but there may be ways to isolate the data that's sensitive off onto segmented systems that reduces the scope that you have to worry about. Or it could be that the data is all over the place because that's how the organization runs. Neither way is right or wrong. You just need to understand what it is. And then we need to visualize that. And again, this is just another, it's kind of small, but don't worry about it. It's just another way to say what data, what applications, what locations do we have? And then I like the visual, just like Tiff said in the previous one, the visuals help. Because on this screen you can go, all right, where do we need authentication controls, access controls? Where are we using preventative controls? How are you controlling the data, controlling access? All those things. And really just get an understanding of the environment.
And I think this brings to light too, when you have the situation where that entity is not in control of it, they've outsourced it to somebody. AWS, Azure, Salesforce, some other application, somebody else has that data. So understanding how that's going to be controlled. We'll talk more about third and fourth parties, but that would be apparent in this picture.
And the cloud usage is critical as well, because if you're doing an examination or looking through from, again, an examiner or auditor perspective, you're looking at how are they protecting stuff on the provider side, on the insurer side, you're looking at how do we set this up so it is protected. But you just need to understand what those zones are. I call them zones of control. In the cloud world, they're called shared responsibility models. But it's who's supposed to be in charge of what, and then how do you make sure they're doing their job, both on our side, if we're the operations side, and also on the service provider side.
Now, you've probably heard a little bit about AI almost in every session today. And yesterday, I was in a few of those. My new favorite quote for AI is approximation of intelligence. Because we're thinking AI is going to do these cool things. We're at the top of the hype curve in Gartner about generative AI. It's going to be the coolest thing. It's going to do everything. But it's not. It cannot fact check. It cannot validate. It's only going to be working with what it's been fed. And as you heard in one of the sessions earlier today, you can unfeed it so it would unknow it. So the training is part of the issue. One of the favorite quotes I heard, the original sin with AI is how it was fed. It was fed information that wasn't necessarily vetted information. It was information that was available information, such as YouTube, et cetera. It's not that that's the only thing, but what was it fed? And how close and what AI was trained in is approximating what you're going to be doing. So if you think about the self-driving cars, and this is from a takeaway here. I think if you're into the AI stuff, I think you should follow the podcast. It's a TED Talk. It's called TED Tech, and they're doing a lot on AI. And some of the things I'm going to mention here are from Gary Marcus, and he had some interesting comments and perspectives about the AI, because we got to think about the risk of it. Yes, there can be ways it's going to help us, but it still needs a human to manage it, because it's still going to give us hallucinations. And one of the things he said is, I think he was the one that coined that term, hallucination. He was sorry he coined that. He said, it's over trust. It's giving it too much humanity to say it can hallucinate. But it's very good. AI is very good at mimicking the illusion of understanding. So it gives you this feedback as if this is a fact. And they tell a great story about, it said Elon Musk died on this date, because on that date there were some Teslas that had accidents. And so the AI didn't know it was making an assertion, but it factually told you that he had died. So it's not without, let me say, it's still needed in the human guardrails. What we have here on the slide in the blue box, some statements from the World Economic Forum on what the threat landscape's looking like. And we've got to get prepared. You saw in one of the earlier sessions about the deep fakes, et cetera, and the accelerated phishing campaigns. They're taking the tools. They're not so worried when they're the bad guys about the tools doing maybe not so great things. They're using it for what they can just slam through and get more phishing to you more quickly. So I think the point here is that Rob and I have been looking at cybersecurity stuff for years. Rob in a more hard and crunchy way, I call it. But I think the acceleration of how they're expanding what they can do as the bad guys with the use of these tools, and our ability to just maybe let some of these tools exist without our knowledge, is setting us up for a very, very increased risk. Do you want to add more to that, Rob?
Yeah, just think the AI is really advanced a lot of our capabilities, because now instead of spending 60 hours writing a policy, you just ask the AI to generate the policy based on a certain standard. But I will tell you, unless it is a highly trained, focused AI, it comes out at 8th grade level, and it's not very good. So you still have to, as Audrey said, you still have to go through it and fix it. We work with a healthcare organization that uses AI to facilitate their doctors. They do not let the AI make recommendations or statements for care. All the AI is allowed to do is take down information and summarize things. And they've said that's because they don't trust the AI at this stage to actually do things. And you know, those of you that are involved in medical insurance, that they're starting to use AIs to code. And that's going to be problematic. And it'll be interesting to see if we get good at that, if we get good, well-trained AIs, or if it's still got a scatter pattern where we have to have the humans back it up. I don't know, huge potentials on the security side, as Audrey mentioned. I watched a demo where a young woman took 10 seconds of a video off of TikTok of somebody, and within 30 seconds was able to mimic their voice on a phone call. And it sounded just enough like them over a cell phone that you just was a little terrifying, because kids or whatever, or a spouse, them calling you in distress and it being their voice. I don't know, there's something that's going to be really hard to combat against. So,
one other thing, because as I'm thinking of you looking at an entity's information security program or having one for yourself, the key is you've got to know what you're securing, like what Rob said earlier. More and more of the daily tools that your company may be using or entity may be using are going to have some AI happening in there. And you may not know what it's doing as far as opening you up to risk. So if anybody uses Slack out there, I'd look into some of the newest articles that are hitting the press right now about Slack is looking to provide more AI agents from them and others in their tools. And they're generative AI bots capable of taking action on their own. That's the key point, taking action on their own. So what does that mean in the environment where that's functioning? So it's fast. That's the point.
The other last thing I'll mention on AI is the fascinating thing I thought is coming into it just with, I think most people came really familiar with ChatGPT, but then realizing to have a really good AI help you do something specific, you either have to have a long prompt to get the ChatGPT style AI to do it, or you have to have a specialized trained AI. But then how do you keep the bias out of it? Like some of the other speakers have commented on. There's a lot of stuff where we'll get into it in the governance section, but there's a lot of stuff you got to think through if you're going to go down the AI path.
No questions in the audience? Other things you've seen?
So in the model law, it talks about the risk assessment process. And so there's a lot of ways to do a risk assessment process. One of the ones we wanted to highlight for you, so if you're an examiner, if you see it, then you know they've done something that's down the line. If you need to do it yourself, you've got a resource. It's a NIST document. So NIST Special Publication 800-30 R1. It's free, right? The federal government puts them out. This diagram comes right from the NIST guidance. Now this is IT specific. So if you're thinking more enterprise risk management or higher level risk management, those are slightly different models. You can use all the same concepts. But in this case, it takes you right through who are the adversaries, who are the non-adversaries, who are the, what events could you be subject to, all the things that an organization needs to think through. In the insurance world, a lot of them have already thought through these things because that's why they're buying the insurance in the first place. But it also demonstrates, if you're an examiner, that the organization has done their due diligence, due care, and they've thought through these things. This could be completely wrong and you could totally disagree with it. But if they've followed a good process, then you tweak the process and get better data into it. And so that's something we've seen just, it takes you through the whole process, the likelihood of events, if there's any predisposing conditions, just the different controls that can be in place. So anything that would result in an IT organizational risk. And so this is just something, this is kind of the deep dive from the model that we wanted to touch on, and again, reference that NIST framework.
I think the NIST framework touches on the 11 things outlined in the model law.
It does a very good job of touching. You have to augment it with some additional detail that's industry specific, location specific. But those should be things that people know about. If you live in Florida, you know the risks of living in Florida. If you live in St. Louis, Missouri, you know about the New Madrid Fault, but you really don't worry about it because it's been 120 years.
And you mispronounced it.
What is? Oh, Madrid?
I'm being, yeah.
Oh, jeez, yeah.
I'm being funny. We mispronounce things in Missouri.
I'm from Colorado, so that's my excuse. I'm sticking to it.
They're awake. I heard some laughs.
All right, well, there you go. The other part we want to go into is, so it's called risk management. The model law, I think, is a little confusing. They call it risk management. This is the information security program. This is the risk management program they want in place. So they want written down how you're going to protect non-public information. So if you as an examiner are getting handed this stuff, you can say, it should say things like, this is how we're going to protect non-public information. We try not to pull, this is right out of the model law, but I try not to pull like word for word because we want you to get a little more synthesis from this. But you can go dive into the model and see these things. Some of the frameworks we recommend you look for or you consider if you're building this out yourself. So a good one for a starter package is called the Center for Internet Security. It's called the Top 18 Controls. It used to be the Top 20. It's 18 controls that if you hand them to an IT person, they'll go, I know what that means, right? Do we have a software inventory? Do I have an hardware inventory? Do we do penetration testing once a year? Things like that. Do we encrypt sensitive data? It's about 85 pages of submaterial that you can get really wonky. but really just starting with those top 18 is a really good start. The NIST cybersecurity framework is the one we encourage most larger organizations to go with. Again, it's a NIST standard. It's free. Version 2.0 just came out. It's a highly tailorable security program. You can start very high level, build deep. It's linked to NIST 800-53, which is the mother of all security standards. That standard, I think, is 600 pages long now, so if you need some light reading material to get you to sleep. And if you have more of an international focus, there's the ISO series, which is the 27001 and 2, which are more general guidance frameworks. All very good, but if you see those, like I said, if you're on the auditor examiner side, you know the organization has thought through something and they're doing something. If you're more on the I need to prepare this, these are good ways to get prepared, things to consider.
You know, one of the things that struck me with the NAIC coming out with this model law, it was very well written from the standpoint of it's still relevant today, even though the technology is changing fast. And as you reference in one of these three frameworks that Rob talks about, those frameworks are getting updated real time as far as how life is changing. There's another NIST for AI that's out there. But it struck me that this model is still relevant today, and you can use the what's changed through these other frameworks in here. So it just compliment to NAIC on that. So it stood strong.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing you'll see in the model law is they want somebody named. They want a belly button that's the named security person, either by position or by name. And typically it's just by position. A lot of times it's the CIO or IT director gets double duty, but they want it named. And that's becoming common across multiple frameworks we see in the cyber world. So not just insurance, but across a bunch of the other frameworks where they want that person or position named. And that's because we want somebody to be in charge. We also want somebody to fire when we have no, we don't want that. But somebody always gets fired when we have ransomware, right?
No,
So
not anymore.
you don't want that to happen, but you do want somebody to be in charge, so you have somebody who's thinking day to day, how do we protect this information? How do we integrate security? And how do I keep senior management aware and on task? Because sometimes you have to do that. It's a continuous cycle, so the little diagram is my little very simple life cycle model, right? Assess, design, implement, operate. There's some others out there that are much more intricate and elegant. Mine is very simple because it's just a little circle, right? It's just assess, design, implement, operate. You just have to keep going around the circle. Your IT folks can't say, okay, we're done and take the year off. They've got to keep at it. And then just a reminder, if you're examining or you're preparing the information security program, make sure it specifically calls out, if you can. If not, then at least cross-references to administrative, technical, and physical requirements. And again, if you have any trouble figuring out what those are, it links directly to HIPAA controls, and so you can pull those directly from HIPAA and cross-reference them to whatever security standard you're in. I know I say that quickly, it's not that simple, but there's lots of help out there if you Google it, and or call me and I'll tell you. So on the next topic we thought we'd cover is the governance section.
So that's actually where there needs to be some formal policies and procedures. The law actually talks about some board oversight that needs to be in place. If you compare to what's going on with the public companies, which have new cyber disclosure requirements as of a few months back, still only maybe a third of those companies really have a strong cyber person or a strong cyber program that they feel they have in place. So there's a lot of work for all of us to do on those. So having the formal policies and procedures Rob talked about, but making sure they're ones that you can adhere to, making sure you've documented who, reporting to the board. So I've seen board reporting go from once a year to practically monthly for some companies. And then I thought the NIST AI framework that just came out, which there's a link for you in there, highlighted some really good things with consideration of AI. The normal stuff like legal and regulatory, but also look at, do you know if it's trustworthy AI? What was it trained on? What's the source? Risk tolerance has been around for a while. But the other one that struck me too is how are you going to decommission or phase out the AI? Where did your data really get ingested to? So these kinds of governance items need dealt with not just after the fact, after something has happened, but before the vendors and the processes and the policies and procedures are being put in place. And we'll talk more about third parties coming up. But the resilience is going to be key to what the governance is going to be looking for, especially with everything going on right now, with the volume of the size of the incidents that we've been seeing.
And also, Audrey, I know you've done a lot of board training. Do you want to talk about, we have it training listed under the AI part, but what about the broader board training and cyber training for boards?
So with cyber training, a couple things we'll do. We'll do a tabletop exercise with them to get their awareness of what could go wrong in their environment. We do the training to make them understand what some of the terms and technologies and pitfalls they should know. The third would be in an area of the hot topics, what's going on out there, so they can feel educated and informed about cybersecurity, so they can ask the smarter questions in the boardroom.
The only thing I'll add here is we talked about it before, just that formal information security policy is, in some organizations, policy means it has to be board approved, but the board has to be aware and endorse so that we have authority and accountability, right? The authority to act and take care of security, but also the accountability to be in charge of security. And if something does go bump in the night, be able to respond with what happened.
This is particularly a passionate area for me. I think I spoke here a couple years ago on some of the service organization controls. I am a contributing author of the AICPA SOC 2 guide, which is related to testing the security of third-party vendors. But the vendor and third-party risk management is getting exponentially, and I keep saying things are getting bigger, but it is, more important. Each year we'll go into a client and they're using 3 new vendors for security, for monitoring, for other activities and technology. So the difficulty is understanding where you have risk. It's no longer just in your on-prem IT environment. It's no longer just your employees. All right, I'm gonna see, who remembers year 2000? Okay, good, yay. Okay, I was around then. I just have good hair color. So the year 2000, if you remember, one of the biggest issues, because I was at PwC, we were talking about managing the risk, teaching everybody about going concern. But one of the biggest hurdles most of the companies had is understanding what they had. They didn't know where their code was. They didn't know where it was hard-coded for year 2000. That was hard back then. Well, look at today. I think it's harder today because when we need to know where we might have risk of anything being exposed or where we want to make sure information is secured, we really don't know where it is. We don't know who's contracted to have more data go to a third party for customer relationship management, your base ERP package, any kind of security monitoring tool. You don't know where that information is. And there are new tools coming online, I'm not gonna name them all, that are helping you look at the data and they can tell you, based on that vendor, where that vendor is using other third parties for their data. Because just because I went to AWS, well, which data center of AWS is it in? Is that another third party out there? So this is not an easy task, and I'm not sure I've seen it done absolutely thoroughly at any company.
No, and with the advanced, like you mentioned, all the third party suppliers, especially like cloud solutions, and you don't know who the sub solutions are behind them all the time. But this is where that cloud, I mentioned the data flow analysis. This is where that data flow analysis for me becomes critical, is you want to flow the data and understand where's the data, who's touching it. So we call it processing, transmitting, or storing. I usually throw collecting in there just to make sure that collection, it enters the environment. If you want to be really thorough, you throw in when it dies, when it's destroyed. But the point is you want to flow that data out and see who touches it, where do they touch it. And then if any of you have heard of the business impact analysis, which is couples with your incident response and disaster recovery plans, but it's basically what are the critical applications and systems in our environment that if they go down, right, Choice Healthcare, if they go down, we can't operate. And what are our options? And so you have to think through, what, as Audrey mentioned, not only what's my first line of support vendors, but what about second and third tier support? And what would happen to them? And you just need to have a plan. So that's where we get into this, keep talking about planning. The other thing I've heard, a couple of people, a couple of really focused security people have gone off on, where is AI? So in every one of your vendors, part of your vendor risk management now has to be, where are you using AI? And does it touch my data? And if it does touch your data, where is that AI taking the data? Is it restricted to their environment, or is it ChatGPT, which is just ingesting it for public use for everybody?
And I think there were some Copilots rollout, updates and rollout coming out this week.
So those things just think through. We won't always be able to, like Audrey mentioned, we won't always be able to get down to the root details, but if we can get down a couple of layers and get some comfort, that's a good way to go.
And the model law in section 4F, it does outline some 10 good steps on determining what's most risky and where is it stored and the type of service and criticality to help you sort of narrow down where you're going to dig in. But as we've all seen, the Change Healthcare outage, some of these other outages, when they hit, it didn't just hit who they served directly. It hit a lot of other entities as well.
And if any of you are familiar with the automotive industry, you know that industry had 15,000 dealers in the U.S. went down.
That one, yeah, that was good.
And it wasn't because they did anything wrong, it was because their service provider had an issue. Cool. The last deep dive issue we wanted to touch on is just incident response. Again, formal plan. The NIST has a great template. It's way too long and way too detailed, but if you take the highlights out of it, it's got some great stuff. And just the key thing with this is it's got to be written down. It's got to be customized to the environment the organization is operating in, and to their cloud usage, on-prem usage, where their data is, all those things. And then the last thing is they need to practice. So Audrey mentioned tabletop exercises. At some point, you should have a tabletop exercise. The organization should. So again, if you're examining or auditing them and you want to see, did they do it? Did they do an after action and make changes? If you're in the organization, you want to make sure your organization is actually going through that. And then make sure it's not just IT doing incident response. It's got to be a business discussion with IT supporting it. So some key areas there. And I always recommend link it directly to your disaster recovery plan because, like the CrowdStrike outage started as an incident, went to a capital I incident, and for a while it was a security incident with a capital I, and then we realized, no, it's just an IT disruption incident, so it kind of switched lanes, but it still had to link directly to disaster recovery. What do we do now? How do we do this? I presented with a gentleman about a month ago who works for a health center in this area, and they were sending IT folks into the operating rooms, like scrubbing in to bring computers back online because you had to manually go visit every computer to do the fix. The fix wasn't difficult, but you just had to physically be there. So just things to think about. Just in summary, right, look for formal documentation. We want to see the continuous improvement processes. For us, for me in particular, that scope is everything. If I don't understand that scope, how do you assess the environment? How do we know the organization is doing what they need to do? Again, whether I'm on the operations side or I'm on the auditor side, that scope is just so critical. And then we always recommend, the automation, leverage it, but beware of it, as Audrey mentioned. And then I always recommend that risk-based approach. Not everything has to be fixed, just things that are important to the organization or to the data or to the regulatory requirements. Anything you want to add to this one?
No, but we did leave 5 minutes for questions.
Yes.
And I'm going to send these guys out. They're going to make you ask.
If you don't have questions, we'll make up stories. Any cyber questions at all? Doesn't have to be
Good, we
about
got one in the back.
There we go.
Should give away prizes.
Oh, yeah. Here. Oh, it's probably not ours.
There was, it's loud. So a while back ago, there was, you can get in through the password reset or something like that. And so passwords and double and triple authentications started happening. Is that going to continue? Like, are passwords just going to continue getting longer?
So, the cool thing is, the NIST guidance is to use multi-factor authentication, which is usually a token or your phone or the text if you have to. That's really not secure, but it's not hugely, anyway, it's better than nothing, but it's not secure. So use those and then use a long passphrase. So I think NIST recommends a 15-digit passphrase. You don't have to worry about complexity. You don't have to worry about making it, super goofy or random characters. Just make it really long.
Like a small sentence?
So the example I always use is purple cloud donkeys, which means nothing to any of you. But to me, it's hilarious, right? They all have different elements that lead back to something in my life that you cannot find on Facebook or LinkedIn or anything else. No, I never use it, but it's my example, because to me, it's hilarious. If you know I'm from Denver, you might guess the donkey part, right? Because the stinking Broncos. But anyway, but the point about that is pick something that is funny to you. I choose funny. If you're serious or emotional, use whatever your thing is. But pick something long. And don't make it too complicated. Like one of our guys uses the first letter from some long limerick. That to me is, I got to think and count on my fingers. I can't, just pick something funny and interesting. Not a line from a movie unless you mix it up. Like I love There Can Be Only One, if anybody knows that reference, but it's a movie line, so you can't use that. But you could come up with something silly, like there could be only 12. No one's going to guess that. 12? Where did that come from? Right? Don't use 42. It's not long enough and it's well known. So that's multi-factor authentication should be here to stay. My recommendation is you should personally and professionally have multi-factor authentication on everything. Everything they will allow. I know it's a pain, but 99% of bad guys will bounce off an MFA. Now, if you're an MGM Grand and it's a huge take, they'll spend the time to go after you. But most of us, they're not going to bother. Right.
So all the accounts you got online, et cetera, should be.
Yeah, I mean, I've had healthcare, banking, any financial secured for a while, but really anything, even my LastPass, which I know has been breached twice, I still use LastPass. It has multi-factor on it. The bad guys are not going to get my master password because it's something equivalent to purple cloud donkeys, and nobody knows what that is.
Any other questions as you're looking? Good.
Thank you for the presentation. I am from Connecticut, data scientist Hisham Bourjaili, and interested in cybersecurity. You mentioned something about the incident response plan. Does the NAIC or you, do you recommend something in particular to share with the employees? Because it's true, sometimes we get in trouble, and then we start thinking what I need to do versus maybe more proactive. So what would you say about this? Thank you.
I got a couple ideas. One, we do the know before training, a lot of security awareness training, but another thing that I think is going to be good to roll out is helping them respond to the incident. So we started a program, Stop, Drop, and Roll, because you know what to do in a fire, right? So it's the same thing for the cybersecurity. When you've blue screened because of CrowdStrike, we're teaching them about stop, drop, and roll. This is what you do in that situation. Don't shut your computer off. Don't do this and that. Rob?
I think the other thing is you got to create a culture where it's okay and encouraged to report. So I kind of hate that if you see something, say something, because it has weird implications. But same thing, if you're a user in the environment, please report it. So when I was a CISO, I was at the University of Denver, and we created a ticket in IT, because I also ran the help desk, and it was called, I may have clicked on something. Because I had to encourage them to call us and say, I may have screwed up, but it's okay. It's okay that you screwed up. You may not have. But we wanted to send people out like right away. We didn't want to wait until 300 computers are locked up. So I think part of that's just a culture thing. And then as Audrey mentioned, there's tools out there that can do security training and phishing awareness. I think Tiff mentioned it in the last session, you gamify it. Mm-hmm. So I know when our organization started sending out the phishing emails, I would always forward them to the CIO with my critique, oh, this was a good one, or no, this was terrible, which I'm sure he loved. because I don't do internal security, I just do client security work. So those are the key things for me. And there's lots of other ideas, but gamify, make it fun, make it interesting, those kind of things. I guess our time is up, but if you have questions, we'll be around. Please feel free to come by. I obviously like to talk about cyber stuff, so if you want to talk cyber, please come see me.
And I'll talk.